The lightsaber is the signature weapon of the Jedi and the Sith, and it's arguably one of the most identifiable and just plain awesome symbols of the Star Wars franchise. So, people just love lightsabers, right? People of all ages are kind of drawn to them. And that's, obviously one of the super cool aspects of Star Wars, and it's one of the most fun aspects of Star Wars, too. Now, let's talk about a few ways that George Lucas described lightsabers kind of since the beginning. So here are 5 very simple ways that Star Wars creator George Lucas has described the origins and the inspiration behind the lightsaber. And most of the following quotations will refer to the original trilogy, which that's kind of when, that's when George Lucas was first looking at lightsabers, and that's really how most of what we know about lightsabers developed, although some of the concepts have evolved over the years as well. All right, first of all, he called the lightsaber a weapon for honorable peacekeepers. So Arthurian legend, pirate films of the 1940s, and Errol Flynn kinds of movies heavily influenced the creation of Star Wars. So George Lucas said, quote, "In developing a group of peacekeepers who were above everything and honorable and could make decisions and bring peace to the galaxy, I needed a weapon that was appropriate for those kinds of Jedi." So that's, the lightsaber fit the bill there. All right, now number 2, he called lightsabers a symbol of a simpler time. So humans, we just often feel very nostalgic about the past, right? And it's supposedly a simpler time, a better time, and so, people often think of it as the good old days. And Star Wars heavily, appeals to that sort of collective feeling, in our society. So George Lucas said, quote, "It was more a symbol of a simpler time, of a time before the Empire had taken over, a time when honor ruled. So the lightsaber was more a symbol than it was an actual weapon in the movie," unquote. So he was talking about Star Wars A New Hope there, the very first Star Wars movie, and that kind of puts everything in perspective a little bit. I know when people talk about the lightsaber duels, sometimes people say, the one in A New Hope, there wasn't really much there. But, that's true, and there are several reasons for that. First of all, you have kind of an old man fighting a slightly less old man, and so the duel's very short. And, if we look at the technology of the day, this was cutting-edge technology, so that was a big deal to even have this short duel in the movie. But, finally, from a storytelling standpoint, according to this quotation, George Lucas really perceived the lightsaber more as a symbol than anything in this movie. And so it didn't necessarily need to be used for fancy duels because it served its purpose as the symbol of this simpler time. Now, number 3, he called it a futuristic sword. So it sounds maybe a little obvious, but one thing that's neat about the lightsaber is it merges the ancient concept of the sword with sort of the futuristic concept of a glowing plasma blade. And so it accomplishes this really interesting goal where it feels paradoxically old and new at the same time, right? Which that's pretty cool. That's what Star Wars commonly accomplishes, especially the original trilogy. It feels kind of like the future, but it's still a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So we see kind of like rusty things and older things, and we have this sort of sense of nostalgia about it. But so George Lucas did want this to be a futuristic sword. So George Lucas said, quote, "The original concept was that Jedi would fight with swords, and then I wanted to make it a futuristic kind of sword, so I made it a lightsaber, which is sort of a laser sword to give it that technology edge to it," unquote. So there you go. It's a merging of the old and the new, and so you get the Jedi wielding a futuristic sword. Now, number 4, a defensive weapon. So Jedi are supposed to be keepers of the peace, right? Deflecting an attack from blaster bolts really illustrates and reinforces the defensive philosophy of Jedi. So George Lucas said, quote, "A laser sword in a world of ray guns would be the perfect defensive weapon," unquote. So, he calls them ray guns there because that's common. That's pretty common that people will refer to blasters in other sci-fi movies and such. They'll be called ray guns. So George Lucas uses that term there. But yeah, so it's a defensive weapon. It's able to defend it, deflect things from ray guns or from blasters. All right, and 5, George Lucas called it a two-handed weapon. Now, requiring the wielder to use 2 hands makes the lightsaber move like it's heavy and unwieldy, like a sword or a great sword, like an actual sword, in real life that way. So here's what George Lucas said about that. Quote, originally it was that you needed 2 hands to hold on to the lightsaber because the amount of energy that is being swung around. So just consider that even throughout the original trilogy, so in A New Hope, the characters really wielded the lightsaber with 2 hands, in a very sword-like way. And progressively, the characters would sometimes use only 1 hand to wield the lightsaber, and that was due to kind of fancier choreography and increased skill of the wielders in some cases as well. So it is kind of interesting, though. That's a real throwback to some of these more medieval swords, of like knights and that type of thing, to have them look like they're kind of very heavy and unwieldy. And also, if we look to the sequel trilogy, the Kylo Ren lightsaber certainly looks very heavy and even looks probably the most sword-like, in terms of like medieval swords out of any lightsaber, right? Because it has the crossguard also. So anyway, you guys, that was just kind of 5 different simple ways that George Lucas has described the lightsaber, and feel free to comment below. And by the way, these quotations were taken from the Star Wars featurette, The Birth of the Lightsaber, which is a really great kind of brief documentary. I'd recommend checking that out if you haven't already, but feel free to comment below.